One of the things we are examining in this unit is this idea of globalization. Our world today is very connected and interdependent for a variety of reasons. To help understand this concept, it's important to understand the relationship between past events and current conditions. This is often referred to as change over time. As we work through the PowerPoint, fill in the graphic organizer that was provided to you. These two photos here shows the enormous amount of change that Houston has undergone in just a period of a little more than 100 years. In this PowerPoint, we will examine how events such as the agricultural revolution, the Columbian Exchange, the search for resources associated with both exploration and industrialization, wars, and colonization have transformed the world into how we see it today. For example, the Columbian Exchange involved the trade of new ideas, products, foods, and unfortunately diseases between the old and new world. This exchange was one of the first steps towards shaping the world as we know it. It's amazing to think just over 500 years ago that there were no cattle or horses in North or South America. New foods brought to Europe from the Americas resulted in massive population growth as diets improved. And of course, sadly for the Native Americans, death ran rampant through tribal populations due to the introduction of new diseases their bodies had no immunity for. The agricultural revolution is actually a series of events that dates back as far as 7000 BC. This marks a transition from hunters and gatherers to more stabilized populations. This was due to new farming techniques and the domestication of plants and animals. As you probably remember from world history classes, this resulted in the early river valley civilizations. People no longer had to spend their time hunting and collecting food sources, so they could stay in one area and soon developed specialized skills and trades. In the 15th and 1600s, common lands in England began to be enclosed or fenced off into individual plots. At the same time, smaller land holdings were being combined into more efficient, larger holdings. This enclosure movement continued into the 1700s. The enclosure movement had several effects. As large landowners added to their holdings, former small plot owners were forced to become tenant farmers or move into the cities. Also, with the common lands vanishing, farmers no longer had to get permission from other villagers to try new farming methods. In the early 1700s, for example, landowner Jethro Tull was concerned about the amount of seed wasted by hand scattering it over the fields. Tull invented a seed drill that made it possible to plant seeds in straight rows. He also made a horse-drawn hoe to dig up weeds between the rows and break up soil before planting. In the 1800s, the agricultural revolution continued in response to the industrial revolution. New technology, chemical pesticides, and genetically modified crops resulted in massive increase in agricultural production. Industrialization, which began in England during the 1700s, transformed societies around the world. It soon set a division between wealthy nations and poorer nations that were largely exploited for resources in new markets. With industrialization came the factory system and wage labor, which led to urbanization. People flocked to the new cities in search of jobs and a better life. This rural to urban migration pattern has continued over time. Reading through the chart pictured here, it's easy to see the enormous changes that were the result of the Industrial Revolution. To explore this idea of change over time we have been discussing, look down to the information on the size of cities. Factories brought job seekers to the cities. Urban areas doubled, tripled, or quadrupled in size. Many cities specialized in certain industries, and as a long-term effect, suburbs soon began to grow as people fled crowded cities. Suburbs are the smaller cities that surround larger metropolitan areas, such as Deer Park, Pasadena, Friendswood, Pearland, that surround the larger area being Houston. Clearly, we cannot take the time to point out all the changes that North America has undergone in the last few hundred years. We can, however, examine a few of the major events that have helped develop the continent and establish its role in our global economy. One of the first major changes on North America was the arrival of European explorers. Native American populations lost fertile lands and resource-filled lands as large regions were colonized. These colonized lands extended European empires, provided new resources and markets, and soon led to large cities and urban areas. North America has a variety of resources, including coal, oil, gas, forest products, and iron ore, to only name a few. These resources have been utilized to provide a strong economy. Goods are now traded between other countries in the global market we see today. In more of a human geography perspective, European colonization allowed for changes in human characteristics by creating cultural characteristics that are closely tied to that of English, Spanish, and French culture. South America has undergone many of the same changes we discussed with North America. For example, while England's cultural characteristics were spread through North America beginning with the original 13 colonies, Spanish conquistadors spread their cultural traits through colonization in South America. Today, Spanish is the dominant spoken language, and Roman Catholic is the most common religious faith found in the region. Another important region in South America that's often the source of a variety of debates is the Amazon rainforest. This vast region, rich in biodiversity and resources, plays a vital role in the ecosystem and global environment. Today, a growing population puts pressure on rainforest lands through mining, logging, farming, and land development. Conservationists suggest that setting limits on development will help protect the Amazon rainforest. Over the last 2 millenniums, Europe has undergone 2 world wars and evolved from an area dominated by the Roman Empire to a region largely united by the European Union. The Industrial Revolution of the 1700s allowed several European countries to gain enormous wealth and build empires that stretched around the globe. To understand the relationship between past events and current conditions, 2 events must be examined. We have World War II, and then subsequently we also have the Cold War that followed World War II and the development of Western and Eastern European nations following the fall of the Soviet Union. Going back to World War II, it resulted in millions of deaths and the destruction of Europe's physical landscape. In addition, as the war came to a close, there were a variety of new borders and political divisions that were established. Nations soon aligned themselves as either being democratic or communist, and a new sense of conflict was established. And that's what's going to lead us into the Cold War. Many countries in Eastern Europe became satellite nations of the Soviet Union. Under communism, these nations did not see the same growth and development that was seen in the democratic Western nations of Europe. Communism took control of Eastern Europe from the end of World War II until about 1990, when it began to collapse in one country after another. Today, these Eastern nations that were once a part of the Soviet Union are still trying to catch up with Western European economies. There's a time-lapse video that's attached to this quest, and it demonstrates how the borders in Europe have changed not only over the last couple hundred years, but over thousands of years. The following 3 maps represent 3 of the time periods I referred to on the previous slide. Figure 1 represents the countries that comprise the communist Soviet Union in red, while the nations in white were the democratic countries of Western Europe. This map refers to that time period between the end of World War II up until about 1991. Figure 2 shows how Europe was divided following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And finally, Figure 3 illustrates those nations in Europe that have become united as part of the European Union. The European Union is a supranational organization designed to eliminate trade barriers between member nations. The common currency, called the euro, is used between these nations, and it has made immigration between countries in Europe more readily available, with fewer restrictions.